What are the devices that make the network operate? There are plenty of devices that you can find on the network, but there are three main devices that you will find on all networks. All networks will have these three main devices. Number one, a switch. The job of the switch is to switch data from one device to another when they are connected to the same network. You can find next a router. The job of the router is to switch data from one device to another device that are in two separate networks. Switch switches data between devices that are on same network, and router routes data between devices that are on different networks. And you will find also the third, in one of the most popular and one of the most important devices on the network, the firewall. The job of the firewall is to inspect the transaction that takes place between the two devices and determine if it is sanctioned by the institution. That means if the institution allows this transaction to take place. And it inspects as well if the transaction is malicious in nature or if it is safe for the organization based on certain parameters. And if it is not safe, it will deny it. If it is safe, it will allow it. That's the job of the firewall. So, can you have a network that doesn't have a switch, a router, or a firewall? I think it is very hard to find a network that doesn't have these three. But when we talk about the switch, understand that the switch is this device that we're talking about here. On the screen, you can see a representation of the Magna Cyber Academy network. I will go into that, but let me introduce this switch to you. The whole idea of the switch is that it has a bunch of interfaces, a bunch of ports. These holes are called ports or switch interfaces. You can connect a cable into each one of them, and that's why they're here. And you can connect the other end of the cable into your computer or your printer or your camera, etc. And when the computer or the camera needs to communicate, it will send its data to this interface. And the switch will switch it to the other interface where the destination device lives on. If those two devices are on the same network, if they are on separate networks, the switch will need to forward that to a router so that the router can forward it to the other network. Now, there are some other versions of a switch that does not require a router. And that's when I introduce to you the access point. The access point is another type of switch. And what it does is that it allows you to expand the switch beyond a physical device that needs a cable for devices to connect to it, to another device that only sends a radio signal. And devices that can listen to this radio signal will connect to this access point wirelessly. And as a result of that, they'll have access to the switch. This is how the Wi-Fi is built. My cell phone can now connect to this access point wirelessly because this will emit a signal within certain radius. And if my cell phone is in that radius, it will hear that signal and it can connect to this access point. Typically, there will be a username or a password that is required for you to connect to the access point. An access point and a switch, they're exactly the same device. They do the same thing. They switch frame. And I say frame now because we are talking about the different types of data that network can process. At the switch layer or at the access point layer, as they are both one and the same, with two different ways of operating, what access point allows device to connect wirelessly, switch allows device to connect with a wire. At this layer, which we call the layer 2, these devices, they process frames. The data is called frame. When it exits these devices, think about if the switch needs to send the data to a router because the destination device is not on the same network. Understand that the switch and the access point, they only process data for devices that are on the same network. If two devices on the same network are communicating with one another, a switch or an access point is enough. But if they're not on the same network, you need a router. In the case when the switch needs to forward it to the router, it will repackage it. This is called an encapsulation. And when it leaves the switch and enters the router, it is now called a packet. So switches and access points, they process frames. Routers, they process packets. And that's all you need to know about the major types of devices. And you're going to start configuring switches very soon in this class.